Jerry forgot to go the fourth
So
person
we
down
didn't
to
get a
George.
burger.
He stopped after her, the third person,
And I
and
was
turned
trying to
around and
divide
went back.
mine up.
And George was like this, where's
He just looked at me like,
Where's Byron?
did you see that? And so I was trying to divide mine up with. It was a little hard. Are you sitting up there? I found you. So we won't get.
Yeah, what's his name, sir?
What's his name? Oh, yeah, he's So how have you been, Art?
Not too bad.
Not too bad?
You know, Ellery's had an operation.
Yes.
I have a good memory, but
Another
short.
one. How's that going?
Yeah.
It's going good.
Yeah.
Well, I don't
She's
know how many people are going to show up
Good.
today.
She doesn't like to sit too long in one place, so
That means we're all
it'll be
good.
another week, I think, before she comes to
Yeah.
church.
Is it painful?
It's, well, after the back operation, we say no. She doesn't complain of pain, but it's stiffness and whatnot. She has trouble bending her knee. She's pretty well walking now, which is good.
Yeah. I had that. I think hers mine must not have been too bad. Because I really didn't have too much trouble at all.
Well, they did quite a bit to her. They released one side of her kneecap and moved it over.
Is Nacho gonna be back today?
No wonder. Oh my goodness.
I
Yeah,
don't
no,
have
those
communication with
little
Nacho,
slip
so
and
I
fix it, that was
really
it.
don't know.
We had trouble getting communication with him too, every time we took a meal over to him.
So we stick it over without even,
Yeah, we never did have success.
we're so forward looking.
So,
I better move up here close to you guys.
You better.
It's like,
Get
Miles away.
farther away from Steve.
Well,
Yeah.
that wasn't the idea.
that's all right. Well, today I'm starting the series with the online debates, and it's going to be a whole group of them, and I'm picking the most controversial issues that I can think of. And they're controversial enough to stop my wife when she was walking behind me through the room. She stopped and, "What are you writing?" You know, and so I thought, well, that's a good one. Then I'm on the right track.
that's funny.
But these are all issues about today. Even Art brought one up about modernism, and I think that kind of all fits together in the whole concept of relevance of the church and Christianity. We're living in the postmodern, post-Christian era right now. Oh, by the way, the food that you're eating, that's a Jewish coffee cake. A little different than most coffee cakes. Too bad Gary's not here. I could throw
What do you want, Art?
Just a piece of the coffee cake.
No drink?
a kosher question at him. This has leavening in it, so
That too, because
it would not be considered kosher. It's more of a German Jewish type recipe.
You already know.
Yes.
So here's an interesting trivia question for you in kosher foods. What food is kosher but comes from an unkosher animal?
Oh, I know.
The answer is honey. Honey itself is kosher, but bees are not kosher. So they would not. There's not too many insects that are actually kosher. In fact, locusts are the only ones that I know of that are kosher.
Locusts are.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And you know that honey is kosher, not just because who ate it.
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist ate it,
Oh, yeah.
but it's the food that is the description of where the Jewish people were headed during the Exodus, the land of
Milk and honey.
milk and honey. Though some scholars debate whether or not they really meant honey, that they were really referring to the syrup that can be acquired from figs and such fruit, but I mean, I wouldn't argue with tradition. Stick with tradition.
This is yummy.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Yeah, it's a pretty traditional style recipe. And in fact, when I was putting it together, somebody walked by and said to me, "Oh, are you making pancakes for your class?" And it kind of looked that way. You know, you got flour and sugar and eggs, and you're putting it together with a little bit of leavening. And pretty much very similar to. Hi there.
Become somebody important. You know, if you come in here, you have to stay.
I do.
Once you're here, we don't let you go. I don't know why I'm getting so much feedback today.
It's a very sparse crowded church today.
I know.
Did you see in the bulletin about the meeting that's going to occur with the pastor and Dick regarding the
traditional service.
the traditional service? Yeah.
And I'd like to go, although the first meeting is, we're going to be in Missouri.
See, I would think it would be just the opposite, especially when you're going after when you have a lot of traditional elements in the service, that it would attract the older folks, because that's what we grew up with, the traditional stuff, and you'd be something for support there. I know the older I get, the more I look back towards those things that, you know, are familiar with you, and you want to, you know, you will try to embrace them more, and whether or not they're just comfort or reinforcement or all of the above. But anyways, the things that I was put on the list for discussion, one of them that was at the very top was the homosexual component of of them participating in a church, and at what level, and how should Christians respond to that? I mean, there's a whole spectrum of questions that can be asked about that. But probably one of the first things, I mean, when you start discussing this, you kind of have to have a platform. You have to have the basis in which to discuss it. And you have to be careful, because sometimes in these discussions they get very emotional. You know, especially if you have somebody that's a homosexual in the crowd, you know, it turns into just a shouting match, and then that's not productive at all. I think Christianity is one of the few religions that really offers a lot to homosexuals, just to start with. But the problem comes not from that. The problem comes is when we step back a little bit. When we step back and we look at, in fact, I have several things on here that I'm trying to pull people up that are live to discuss it with them. But of course, time zones and everything is all different. This one person here named Marcus, he says, there can be no tolerance for homosexuals in the church. Condemnation of homosexuality is throughout the Bible and must be overcome just like any other sin. Well, when you start off with that, you don't want to start off with a foundation like that. You want to start off with that's what the Bible says, and that's true. But you want to start off with trying to understand where the sin is coming from. Now, if we go back a step and we look at some of the arguments that are made, is that, let me see if I can pull this up, that homosexuals say that they were made that way. Homosexuals say there is no harm to the participants or anyone else. If it feels right to those involved, it's no one else's business. Homosexual relations and heterosexual relations are equally valid, and some even claim that the Bible condones homosexual relationships. I don't. There is no evidence for that. That's a distortion, like the relationship. Many male relationships inside the Bible. Those are distortions of those relationships. That's never been proved that there was any type of behavior like that occurred. And when they argue that there is medical evidence for their behavior, sometimes they will use a variety of different researchers that have stated that their behavior comes from either a genetic or glandular or some type of medical condition, such as Hammer's X chromosome research, LeVay's study on hypothalamus, or the Bailey-Pallard study with identical twins. Has anybody ever heard any of those studies? Yeah, you have. And what did you follow up on any of those?
Not very far, but there was a claim with the identical twins that one was and one wasn't. And they make a comparison all the way
A
through.
higher percentage of identical twins will have at least one of their partners.
Well, they didn't give a percentage. That's the trouble. You don't completely understand the study because you don't get all the details.
Yeah, they're stretching.
Well, with the when I followed up on some of these studies, there were homosexuals that were involved with the research. So that kind of leans the agenda a little bit, number one. And number two, when they tried to follow up as far as, when you do scientific research, what you have to do is have a peer group review it, and part of the review is to reproduce the results. So, and this happens several times, and this is part of the whole process. So, when the peer groups review the studies, they couldn't reproduce the results, and so then they consider it. Well, I'm sorry, we don't consider this scientific then. It's a very interesting study, but it's not considered scientific. Unfortunately, the gay community continues to use these types of results, and they throw them at you. And unless you're familiar with this research, you just kind of sit there, and go, well, I don't know. If science, if they use the word science, if science says that this is the way it is, well, then you're kind of at, it's kind of like someone saying, well, God said, you know what I mean? You're just kind of stuck there. There's no rebuttal. But if you do know the science and you do respond to it, unfortunately, that can cause more problems in the debate too, because then people get very angry and there's all this yelling and screaming, and it's not productive anymore. So you have to approach the responses very carefully. Now, I'm trying to find, see if anybody else has responded here. This person says, I went to my church to be as full and flattering, struggling sinner with a deep love of Jesus and a desire to help one another. The judgment scene shown in the Gospels shows people being judged about giving cups of cold water, visiting the sick and in prison, helping the poor, and so on. Too many of us are good at stating what the problems are. Very few of us try to solve them. Now, that's true. It's true too, especially in this area. But I think the problem is compounded is that homosexuals, they don't want to be helped. They want to be just accepted. The idea is their idea is to be accepted as who they are, and this is a lifestyle that you have to accept, and it's not true. You don't have to accept it. You can see how they would build that. They would say this is a scientific fact that homosexuality is something that I have no control over. It's genetic or from the hypothalamus or something else. And research from people like Dr. Dobson disagrees with that as well. He says, no, that's not true. And there's a couple of really good books out there. I was trying to think of the name of the one I just got recently. And it talks about how the homosexual behavior kind of comes along very similar to alcoholism in a family. People who are not so much predisposed genetically or biochemically to the drug are in an environment that does reinforce it. And when it's reinforced like that and pushes a person into it, then they are kind of a bit of, they're vulnerable to that psychologically. Now, that doesn't take away their desire to be able to make a decision, just like the alcoholic. Am I going to drink today or I'm not going to drink today? You know? And that's part of what you get in 12 steps. You know, I'll choose not to drink just today.
Have you come across the book Stranger at the Gate?
I have not, no.
Can't remember the guy's name who wrote it. And it's a number of years ago now. It's been around for 20, 30 years. But he was a pastor at a church in Pasadena, very successful, very evangelical church, and struggled with this for all of his life, and finally acknowledged it and came out. Lost his wife over the whole thing, left the ministry, and they left ministry at that place. I think it was at Fuller Seminary as either a student or professor or whatever, and went down to Texas to join a homosexual congregation. And last I heard, he's still there. But anyway, he wrote this book. I had great respect for him.
Yeah.
Honor him. I don't agree with his conclusion. I guess he began.
What was his conclusion?
Well, he was fighting it, as he recalled, since his adolescent days, and finally decided that to fight against that was not the right way to go. So he was still in relationship with his faith, still in relationship with the Lord, and decided the best way was to accept it, announce it, and live with it. You know. Well, I disagree with that. I think all of us have temptations and deal with sin, and we continue to struggle with it, and sometimes you win, sometimes you don't, and but that doesn't mean that accepting of that.
And propensities for it.
Well, but there's another dimension to that, and that's very important what you just said, is that, you know, we live with sin every day. We have our struggles, and there's all types of sin around us every day. But we don't participate in sins like that. For example, if you said, this church would let somebody be a member in it. In fact, they could end up being an elder or a deacon or something like that in it. That was a person that had committed adultery. Okay? But let's say they had done that. They had got before God on their knees, asked for forgiveness, asked the church to pray for them, to be in constant prayer, and they had put their marriage back together, and they don't do that anymore. They don't live that behavior anymore. So, versus a homosexual who was saying, you have to accept me, I've come out of the closet, this is who I am, this is my lifestyle, you have to accept me who I am, and this is how I'm going to live the rest of my life. Now, what's the difference there? The difference is that we're accepting the sin of the second person there. And they're committing that sin all the time.
Yeah.
You know, that would be the same as somebody coming into the church and saying, I want you to accept me as a member of this church, I fornicate all the time. Mm-hmm. You know, accept me that way. Well, I'm sorry, brother, but you're going against, you know,
now
the teachings there.
The temptation is not the sin.
That's right. The temptation is not the sin. And even though Jesus said, you know, if a man just looks at a woman, that he has committed that sin, the idea of repenting for that sin constantly and wanting to be away from that sin is wholly different than saying, I'm going to embrace that. And that's where we would collide in the church with that, I would think. I mean, I can't imagine a church that would want to say, we're going to live the gospel, we're going to preach the gospel, we're going to teach the commandments, we're going to try and live by the commandments, but we're going to toss certain ones out so we can embrace certain people. Yeah, Gary.
I'm a murderer, so you better accept me.
Well, yeah.
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 And then the other arguments where they say, well, this is my natural behavior. This is how I was designed. You have to accept me this way. Well, we have all kinds of behaviors like that. I get hungry every day, but I don't just walk into a store and start eating and say, God made me this way. I get hungry, so therefore I'm going to eat, and you can't do anything about it. You should accept me that way. You know? I mean, that's just, it doesn't make any sense. It's antisocial. It would eventually tear a society apart if we acted on every desire just because we're biologically geared that way.
You know, there's a lot of things going on, and something's always bothered me, is that we seem to pick on homosexuality. We don't pick on adultery, we don't pick on other things, and I think one of the reasons is, I can sit there and say, well, I'm not homosexual, so they're bad. However, I could be an adulterer, so that's not so bad. But you see things going on today on TV, the unmarried that are living together and having families and whatnot. What's the difference there? They're both sins. We praise one, condemn the other.
No difference.
Well, that's what I was just saying, is that we shouldn't be praising that. We shouldn't be praising
We
that.
should condemn them all.
And it should be
Yes,
condemned
right.
across
Yeah.
the board.
Yeah.
It should be condemned across the board. If somebody comes into the church, I don't know, how does the church respond here if someone comes in here and says, we're living together?
Well, you know, the church is supposed to accept all. And I think the difference is that we've used the phrase in the past when we fought this issue is that we should be welcoming and transforming. Welcome them into the church, explain what the sin is, and I think the only correction on some is celibacy. But once they embrace that, then they're full bona fide members of the church. They've admitted a sin, the same as an adulterer or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I know the Church of Christ will do that. I know they will reprimand people in front of the congregation, and they can't participate in certain activities if this is brought before the church like that. Now, it's not brought before the church until it goes through, let's see, where is it? Which one of the epistles? First, it's brought to you by a member of the church, and then it's brought to you by several members of the church, and they try to discuss it with you, and it keeps going up and up and up until the pastor talks to you about it, and if you still don't repent, then it's brought before the congregation, and a decision is made on what action should be taken.
But that's not just a sin, that's all sins that could be treated that way.
That could be treated that way. That's true. But I'm talking about a specific sin that they're addressing. But it's true that it would cover a whole spectrum of sins. And we've kind of gotten away from that in general. And the further you get away from that, the further the church gets away from responding to sin, well, the church starts to fall apart, doesn't it? Because if you accept everybody's sin, and there's no response to it, then what are we doing here? It's just a social club.
We probably have to clarify, as far as the church is concerned, what accepting means. We would be totally accepting them to our worship services, our classes, our activities, social, spiritual, whatever. No question asked, you know. When it comes to membership, then you begin to confront some of these things, and I would guess that membership would not be offered.
Well, when you say accepting in this context you're talking right now, you're talking about just letting the person come in the front door and
make them feel welcome.
make them feel welcome, and
invite them to the class.
let them be in the class, and let them be in a service, and let them come to a.
And at some point, in some cases, you wouldn't even know about the homosexuality at that point, or you might know. But whether you know or not know, that's okay.
Yeah.
When it comes to membership, then I guess it's incumbent upon us to find out and to know and to you interview them, you talk to them a little bit more, you ask them questions. And I would guess that membership would not be offered until that issue is dealt with in some acceptable way.
And that's true. Now, what you're saying right there is true for anybody that would confess a sin, right?
Right, any sin.
Any sin.
Right, theoretically, yeah, right. Now, some churches might not draw the line at that point. They might say, well, membership's still okay, it's just that we would not ordain them for eldership or leadership or whatever like that. And they draw the line at a later point, and some churches don't draw the line at all.
Well, you're now hitting upon this new NFOG. The NFOG says that the Presbyterian Church now will accept anybody into ministry or anything, irregardless.
And that's why it becomes an issue for us.
And that is the big problem right now. I mean,
Okay, why would it be a big problem?
because they allow it.
But why?
We want a leadership that is
Because
living in a sinful nature.
and it's because we are a part of that organization, part of that association, and so all of a sudden, when the upper echelons of our organization begin to agree to things that we don't think are biblically accurate, then that becomes a problem. We have to either leave or converse.
Well, I would see it as a problem. Fundamentally, even if you back all the way down to the member, is that, let's say somebody who's in a leadership position in the church says, okay, I'm not going to be here next week. Could you take the class for me? And this person is just a member in the church. So, sure, I'll take the class for you. And they get up there and they disregard everything in Scripture,
Right.
And they start teaching that. And there's people in the class that are, impressionable about that.
And that's why I would agree that you need to draw the line at membership and no further than that. Fellowship, yes, but membership, no, until we get that there. However, your example is risky because in a class like this, you could say, I'm not going to be here next week, and motion to somebody who might not even be a member of the church. And he might just be visiting, and he's well known because he's been there for X number of weeks or whatever. And so, yes, I'll be glad to take the class next week. And he hasn't stood the test of membership. And so now do we draw the line and say, okay, you can get a substitute if you want to, but the substitute has to be a member of the church because then we know he's going to.
Yeah, it would be up to, that's true, but I would think that the discretion of the teacher, would apply there. That you would know that person, you wouldn't just,
that error.
here's this guy walking down the street, hey, you take the class next week for me? You wouldn't just do that, number one. And number two, you'd have somebody like Doug sitting in here going, Steve, I don't know who this guy is. If you're sure you want him to teach the class. I mean, that's why you have other people in the body of Christ to help you out a little bit and things like that.
Like a guest speaker.
Exactly right.
You have some kind of screening.
Right.
Well, when we were working with the chaplain at Juvenile Hall, the chaplain really interviewed people before she would even allow them to come in. And she had to find out what their theology was and all these things. And so she'd have a nice conversation with people. And she turned down quite a few.
Yeah. Okay.
Art, you were gonna say something.
No, that's all right.
Raise your
You're
mic.
sorry?
He
You're
thought
sorry you didn't have
better of
anything to say?
Well, see,
No, I was
did you
thinking
see
of
the
judge,
value of
not
this?
lest ye be judged.
Yeah.
And
Now,
take-
in my naivete,
Yeah.
I don't know many people who I think are homosexual. I can remember one kid when I was young, and the mothers told us to stay away from Boson. We had one guy from Washington that would come in, he was the launcher guy, Cronenberg. but I don't actively know people who profess to be. I live in a very, very small shell.
Well, you probably know them, but you don't realize.
That's
There's
true.
a lot,
Yeah.
lot of homosexuals.
But you could sit in a Sunday school class and have one in the class that appears to be okay, ask them to substitute, and bingo, you've got one there, and the message is probably not bad.
I lived by lots of them one time,
Mhm.
way up in Northern California. And a lot of them are hardworking people. They do the profession.
Yeah.
They have a partner that they live with. And no problems at all. They do their job, they come back, they have a dog, they go for walks.
They're like us,
They are.
yeah.
They speak politely, you know. But, and then there's others that are kind of, like kind of, you know.
In your
Yeah.
face.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when you get to know them, the internals is kind of like if you see the women together, it's like you almost see a man and a woman together. Because in the mind, it just, I don't know, it's an interesting. Well, we were invited to a wedding, or it wasn't a wedding, it was a birthday party or something like that, and there were lots of people there that were that nature. But it's an interesting culture to be around.
And we have one in our family, in our
Yeah.
extended family, and you don't love them any less. You have
Right.
everything to do with them. They're just a
Yeah,
flirt.
and it is a fine line, just saying, like, do we draw a line, do we,
Yeah,
you know?
just agree to disagree.
Yeah. But you always have to remember that we're all sinners.
Yeah.
They're what?
We're
We
all
are.
sinners.
Yeah.
And we have to take the log out of our own eye before we can start messing with other people's
Yeah, some,
ideas too. So first look to yourself and your own sin, then you start judging. Well,
Some-
you never judge the other
some people can
person.
make the error of washing it away and making light and not paying attention, and we feel like that's error. Then it's also the opposite extreme where you can make it a bigger sin than some of the other sins that we are. And it's sin is sin,
Yeah.
and I suppose there's different levels of sin, but
Well, that's an interesting question. I wonder, I always wondered
Yeah,
about that.
I've never studied
Is
that.
murder, I was just reading in the paper, something the other day that Chairman Mao in China murdered like 50 million people.
Yeah,
Now, how does that compare with somebody who says a lie to
exactly.
get by in a test, you know? I mean, do they correlate? Does God, how does
Well,
God?
that's kind of a Catholic concept too. The Catholics do that, have
I know
sins
they
that
do.
are, you know, worse than
Mortal
others.
sins and venial
Yeah.
sins.
Yeah.
The thing that, and when I was talking to a Muslim about this, is that the concept of sins, how much sins, and the type of sin and how much sin you've committed becomes irrelevant under the cover of Christ. And that's the beauty of Christianity, is that all of that can be taken before Christ.
Repentance is what.
And it doesn't matter. I can stand shoulder to shoulder with my Muslim friend or a homosexual friend, and we can all take those sins to Christ, and it doesn't matter to him. It's all covered the same way, and we all approach God with that cover. But that's the kind of thing that we have to bring to them in love.
So in society, it might be okay to try to determine different levels of sin. So one is the death penalty, other is life in prison, other might be 20 years or whatever like that, or probation or whatever. But as far as God is concerned, we are all guilty of sin, and you're guilty of one, you're guilty of all.
And that's the thing that makes, the Muslim religion so difficult, is because you're supposed to, like Catholicism, you're supposed to have this type of repentance and prayer to cover that. And
Has to be a
you
weekly
don't
thing
know.
or a daily thing.
Just like I was talking about, if your eye wanders and you had a little bit of lust there, but you didn't know, and you forgot to pray about that, ask the priest to tell you how many Hail Marys to say for that, or you forgot to pray about it when you were kneeling in the mosque before Allah, and you forgot about it, you're lost.
The wonderful
According to
part
their
is
religion.
that God doesn't make mistakes because he can look right into us,
Yes.
no matter how we act. He knows what's going on in our hearts,
Yeah.
and that's why his judgment is the perfect judgment.
You don't have to confess your prayer or your sin to him. All you have to do is open your heart, and that's enough. And you see that. Okay, great, good discussion.
I got a
Anything else?
question, I don't know, like, they've said they have one in their extended family. How should the church support them? Because we should be part of what they do, they're members of the body.
You
I
think
don't know
they should
the answer to
support
that,
them any
other
differently?
than-
We should have a written report from them every week.
I suppose if we asked for support, if we
Yeah.
needed it, we would.
You would get it.
You'd get it.
Yes.
Well, maybe there's a message in there that, we need to be convicted of our own sin. Sometimes we don't realize that we're sinning. We think it's an acceptable lifestyle. It may not even be homosexuality, it may be something else.
Yeah.
That we are not fessing up to or being convicted of ourselves that we're doing something wrong. I think that maybe that message of the homosexual applies to us too, or to me. You got to be careful of what you're doing and be praying about. Are you in the will of God?
And that's why you need the Bible, because the
Yes.
Bible kind of
Yes.
draws the guidelines for
The
us, what
scriptures.
to do and what not to do. Like
Yeah.
in the sermon this morning, he told us the fruits of the Spirit and also the bad parts, what you shouldn't do. So our behavior should be guided. Sometimes our conscience isn't really,
That's right. That's right.
It's faulty.
It's faulty.
But I think if you know it's a sin and you continue in it without repentance, that's the important thing.
Sure. Yeah. But you're trying to do something about it.
But that's the difficulty. That's the thing that I'm trying to bring out here, because I think a lot of what we're discussing here is kind of like the practical stuff, But there's also different dimensions of that too. You have things like the family situation that you're talking about. How do you deal with it in a family situation? And how would you counsel these people if they came to you and said, we've got this family situation and I'm not sure how to deal with it? And then you've got like an administrative level of it as well. If you were a deacon or an elder or a pastor in a church, and somebody approached you, either the homosexual themselves or somebody in the congregation, and said, "How do we deal with this problem? Is it a problem? How do we approach it? What are we going to say? Are we going to do anything with this person? I mean, this person, the person came in like you were saying, that they came in and they didn't make an issue of it at all. They were just quiet about it. It was their personal lifestyle. They didn't say anything to anybody. They sounded like everybody else. They loved the Lord and they read the Bible and everything else, except when they got to a couple of pieces of scripture, they blotted those out of their mind, And so if you ask them, do you believe in the scripture? And they say, well, yeah, I believe in the scripture. I believe it's sola scriptura. I believe in it. I'm a God-loving person. I want to be a member of your church. And then you get to the point where they're a member of the church, and you think, wow, Joe Smith here, he's a great guy. Let's find some other position for him here. Let's get him active in the church. Oh, then he says, oh, I can't do that this week. I've got a gay rally to go to. What happened here? Wait a minute. Let's talk about this a little bit. So that's the kind of stuff that really I think the church hasn't addressed enough, because it's gotten into the churches so far, and it's affected even this denomination, I think, and changed it, and I think it will bring them down, because it opens it up too much. If you open it up too much, it's like marriage. If the word marriage means anything to anybody, then it means nothing.
I married my dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a loving relationship.
There-
He adores me.
There's a person in, I think it's Texas, that wants to marry
I can see his
a
point of
horse.
view.
Oh my gosh,
We laugh at this, but the thing is, when it means nothing, you've destroyed an important institution that's a foundation to society itself.
Well, that's what's happening to the Christian church today. It's being destroyed.
You keep
But
undermining
within,
it.
Not from without, from within.
Yeah, you keep undermining it,
Yeah.
and just like any structure, you just keep spraying it. Even if it's just water, pretty soon the foundation will give away and the whole thing will collapse. When I was at a friend's funeral, just a little while ago, we were sitting there, and he was asking me about my ministry, and he is more interested in what my ministry is than what my church is doing, because the independent ministries are the ones that are moving forward, because the churches, the denominations are collapsing, they're coming apart, they're losing their definition. You can't say, oh, I belong to this church and this denomination, and this is what they stand for, and this is what they've always stood for. It's like the guy who went to heaven and he saw all these beautiful flowers, and at the end of the garden he saw a cactus, and he said, what's the cactus doing here? St. Peter says, well, all of these represent denominations. And he said, well, what's the cactus represent? That's the Catholic Church. Don't mess with it. You stomp on a flower, but you don't mess with the cactus. You get stuck. In a way, it's true. I mean, I disagree with a lot of things in the Catholic Church, but they've stuck to a lot of stuff. Okay, let's move on. Chapter 51 in Isaiah. I'm going to be moving at a little faster pace. Normally we do like 2 or 3, sometimes 4 verses in a class. We're going to be doing a little bit more because I want to finish Isaiah before I completely lose my sight. I'm going to be seeing a specialist, chief of ophthalmology from University of Oklahoma this week. He's giving me a few more options. So please be in prayer about that.
You go this week?
Yes, sir. The last 2 ophthalmologists were concerned, and so it was a little bit out of their pay range to work on my problem. Hopefully this guy will have some ideas. Okay, we're in chapter 51. Actually, read the last verse of chapter 50 for me, somebody.
This is what you shall receive from my hand. You will lie down in torment.
Okay. And so let's start with 51. Everybody got a Bible? Can you read from that clearly, or should I pass this stuff out? Everyone read that okay? Okay, let's just do a kind of a round robin and do the whole thing. I think there's 23 verses in this. So Barbara, you want to start?
Listen to me, ye who follow after righteousness, you who seek the Lord, look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the hole of the pit from which you were dug. Look to Abraham your father, and to Sarah who bore you, for I called him alone, and blessed him, and increased him.
The Lord may surely comfort Zion, and will look with compassion on all her ruins. He will make her deserts like Eden, her wastelands like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in her. Thanksgiving and the sounds of singing.
Listen to me, my people. Hear me, my nation. The law will go out from me. My justice will become a light to the nations. My righteousness draws near speedily. My salvation is on the way, and my arm will bring justice to the nations.
The islands will look to me and wait in hope for my arm. Lift up your eyes to the heavens, look at the earth beneath. The heavens will vanish like smoke. The earth will wear out like a garment, and its inhabitants die like flies. But my salvation will last forever. My righteousness will never fail.
Hearken unto me, ye that know righteousness, the people in whose heart is my law. Fear ye not the reproach of men, neither be afraid of their revilings.
For the moth will eat them up like a garment, and the worm will eat them like wool. but my righteousness will be forever, and my salvation from generation to generation.
Awake, awake, clothe yourself with strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake, as in days gone by, as in generations of old. Was it not you who cut Rahab to pieces, who pierced that monster through? Verse 10. Next customer.
Verse 10.
Verse 10. 51:10.
Was it not you who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, who made the road in the depths of the sea, so that the redeemed might come cross over?
The ransom of the Lord will return. They will enter Zion with singing. Everlasting joy will crown your heads. Gladness and joy will overtake them. And sorrows and sighing will flee away.
I, even I, who comforts you. Who are you that you fear, mortal men, the sons of men? Who are you but grass?
Are we going all the way?
Yeah, all the way.
Okay. And you forget the Lord your Maker, who stretched out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth. You have feared continually every day because of the fury of the oppressor, when he is prepared to destroy. And where is the fury of the oppressor? The captive exile hastens, that he may be loose, that he should not die in the pit, and that his bread should not fail. 15.
I hate it when you read out of a different version. It's so hard to catch.
15.
For I am the Lord your God, who churns up the sea so that the waves roar. The Lord Almighty is his name. I have put my words in your mouth and covered you with the shadow of my hand. I, who set the heavens in place, who laid the foundation of the earth, and who said to Zion, you are my people.
Awake, awake, rise up, O Jerusalem, you who have drunk from the land of the Lord, the cup of his wrath, you who have drained in its dregs, the goblet that makes men stagger. Of all the sons she bore, there was none to guide her, and all the sons she reared, there was none to take her by the hand.
These double calamities have come upon you. Who can comfort you? Ruin and destruction, famine and sword. Who can console you? Your sons have fainted, they lie at the head of every street, like antelope caught in a net. They are filled with the wrath of the Lord and the rebuke of your God.
Therefore hear now this thou afflicted and drunken, but not with wine. Thus saith the Lord and thy God, that pleadeth the cause of his people. Behold, I have taken out of thine hand the cup of trembling, even the dregs of the cup of my fury. Thou shalt no more drink it again.
But I will put it into the hand of those who afflict you, who have said to you, lie down, that we may walk over you. And you have laid your body like the ground, and as the street for those who walk over.
Okay, any impressions? You're just reading that.
Keep you your vision on God.
Yeah.
And escape. Eventually, we will persevere, and He will carry us through these bad times.
Listen to me, you who pursue righteousness and who seek the Lord. Look to the rock from which you were cut, into the quarry from which you were hewn. Consider your godly origin. Consider your godly origin. Now he's talking to Israel, but again, this is one of those transcendent, not only verse, but the material in this entire chapter here. That's one of the reasons why when people from other countries had events that occurred, they would say, quick, go find out what the Jews think about this. because they had prophets that were telling them specific things that were going on. They had the people that knew how to interpret these events. They had people who would say, okay, this is a bad thing that's happening, you guys need to repent, or you need to do this, or you need to do that. You need to stop what you're doing, or you need to do more what you're doing. They would constantly look, they'd have these elaborate religions sometimes, and they'd say, stop, let's find out what the Jews think about this. Just as Abraham was called as an individual to be the progenitor of the great nation, so God would continue to increase and bless the remnant people. Now, who were the remnant people? The people that were left after all of these armies came in. After the Assyrian armies came in, after the Babylonian armies came in, they're either slaughtered or destroyed or scattered, but there's always that remnant. Look to Abraham, your father, and to Sarah, who gave you birth. When I called him, he was only one man, and I blessed him and made him many. You remember that's when God told Abraham that he would be the father of many nations. And these things, this is why the Torah is so important. Ding ding! Because if some people will just say, oh, I just need to read the Gospels and I've got everything. No, you don't. No, you don't.
That's the foundation.
Yes, you totally miss what's going on. Why Jesus said the things that he said. Why the Jews reacted the way they did. The mention of Sarah is interesting since she had been barren, just like Israel has been, not producing what it's supposed to produce. But through God's special intervention, she became a mother. And what are some of the things that Sarah did? When the angel of the Lord said that she will have a child. Now you got to remember, she's really old. What happened?
She laughed.
She laughed. Very good. Give this guy a star. God would make Israel fruitful after a period of separation from God. Look at Israel today. Look how fruitful Israel is today. Poor little Israel. Name some of the technology that's come from Israel. Look at the hydroponic stuff they're doing. And look at the stuff they've done with the internet. I think they're the developers of email or something like that. Aren't they the ones that export email?
I think that was Al Gore.
Al Gore too. I keep forgetting that guy.
Al Gore.
The Lord will surely comfort Zion and look with compassion on her ruins. He will make her deserts like Eden, her wastelands like a garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in her, thanksgiving and the sound of singing. The reference to the garden of the Lord, the land that had been uncultivated. I've got fallow. Anyone else have fallow in their Bibles? The land was fallow, which just means uncultivated. God will restore it to its original paradise, like the well-watered, lush garden of Eden. The word singing here, which is the Hebrew word zimrach. Let's put your accent on the last part of the word in Hebrew, in which means songs. Where you get the word songs from. God's praises again will be sung in response to what God has done. And that's what we see people. In fact, my Hebrew teacher was talking about how in some of these parties they have during some of these celebrations they have the Jewish New Year's just came by, they have to change how they celebrate it. No longer can they have the toy guns and stuff, and you can understand that. Because as a little kid, they used to have toy guns and go out there and pop, 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 and you wouldn't want to do that, today. Understandable. Listen to me. What's that?
Sounds all right to me.
Yeah.
I have a toy gun. Shotgun.
In fact, they was just telling us about all his guns. Were the paint guns, right?
Yeah, that's okay.
Paintball?
Paintballs, yeah, that's right. My nephew, he's all into that as well. He's always toting out all of his weapons every time I come over there to show me his weapons. And
But what you're saying about Israel and all these promises, only if they keep the tradition and keep their faith in the one and only God.
That's
Because
right.
when they go off base, they get whacked down so bad.
And why